So this afternoon we have a 2009 Hyundai Sonata. It was towed here a couple days ago for a cranks no start condition. We just pushed it in the shop and I'm going to have a look at whether the check engine light comes on or not and see if we can hear the fuel pump cycle. There's the check engine light and I heard the fuel pump prime. Let's see what it sounds like. Sounds like we're out of fuel. The fuel gauge does show that it has fuel in it. It's about a quarter tank, but it acts like it's out of fuel. Alright, well, we're going to put a battery charger on it and maybe throw a scanner on it and see if it's got any codes to give us. Okay, so I have a battery charger on it now, so the battery's up a little bit more. Notice we have RPM on the tach, so that kind of suggests the crank sensor is working. So with the engine cover off here, we can see the fuel rail coming in here, and there's no pressure test port. This is the fuel rail coming in here, fuel line in. It's a returnless system. So to check fuel pressure, we have to undo the fuel line and put a test adapter in here. Right in here. I should have that test adapter, but that's a rigid line. Well, it's flexible back here, so actually there's a hose clamp back there. Really? Let's have a look at this. That's the fuel line. Oh no, that's the fuel line right there. Is there a return line on? Then it must be a vent line, that other one. Well, we'll scan it and see if there's any codes. So I thought I had a record on this, but I can't find one. So we're going to start a new record. Let's see if it'll automatically ID. I have the key on. Battery charger on it. Come on, you can do it. Usually it's quicker than that. I'll get the mileage later. Let's do a code scan. Key on, engine off. Well, if it was running, I wouldn't be scanning it. Let's see if there's any codes related to this problem. Map sensor, pressure, circuit, range, performance. That's interesting. If the map sensor is skewed, it might cause it to underfuel. That's cool. Well, we'll pick up when we get to the end of this list because it's going to take a few minutes. Okay, we're finished doing the network scan. We got the P0106 manifold pressure sensor or circuit range performance code. SureTrack is suggesting it's probably a map sensor itself. In the other computers, we got a passenger airbag telltale lamp failure and low battery voltage in the airbag system. And the codes haven't been recently cleared because all the monitors are running past. So let's go back into engine and have a look at the current map sensor reading. Come on, you can do it. Load the data. Okay. Manifold absolute pressure sensor voltage 3.8. To me that seems a little low. This is naturally aspirated engine, so normally they're around 4.8. But an intake manifold pressure in inches of mercury is 28.6, so that's a bit low. Should be around 29. That shouldn't be enough to make it not fire. Coolant temperature 8 Celsius. Cranking signal, we'll have a look at that. And we'll have a look at injector pulse width. Throttle is 9%. I'm sure this is drive-by-wire throttle. Injection time, milliseconds. PS voltage. Well, it looks like injection time is individual cylinders, so we'll pick cylinder 1. Or cylinder 2, that's on the other side of the chart here. And crank it over and see if we get a injector pulse. Well, as you can see, there's a map sensor change. It's funny that it actually went up. And we got injector pulse width. Seems odd, 23 milliseconds. That seems long, but got a crank signal, got injector pulse width. Well, I know it's sure acting like it's fuel, but it's not convenient to check fuel pressure. So I decided I'd check for sparks before we go and start checking fuel pressure. So I can hear it jumping from here. So I think the easiest thing to do rather than take the fuel rail off here is this should be accessible from the back seat. So we're going to take the back seat out and see if we can put a pressure gauge in there. So I'm going to use the bidirectional controls to turn the fuel pump on. I've accessed the fuel, I can hear the fuel pump relay. I've accessed the fuel pump behind the passenger seat. Too bad this wasn't the fuel line, this is the vent line. Fuel line's right here. So we're going to see if we can take that fuel line off and put a T-fitting in it and check pressure. I don't believe this has an inline filter. So I managed to get the fuel line off. I'm sure that the green line, or that line is the fuel line, because the other one goes to the charcoal canister. Pump's running, but absolutely 0 pounds pressure. So is it empty? Fuel gauge says a quarter tank. I think I'm going to pour some fuel in it and see what happens. So I'm pumping gasoline into the tank as we speak and running the fuel pump, and there's no change. So either I'm on the wrong line at the fuel pump and I only see 2, or the fuel pump has actually died. These little electric transfer pumps are really handy. So I put about 4 gallons in. Well, I'll make sure I'm on the right line. If I am, then I've got a failed fuel pump. So it turns out that this fuel line here is the actual fuel supply line. I should have noticed the arrow on there indicating out. This is just a vent line over here, and it was a difficult one to get off. So I got the fuel line on now, fuel gauge. And because it's a returnless system, I can deadhead the pump. It's a mechanical returnless system, I believe. Well, now I'm confused. We got 50 pounds of fuel pressure. Now I did put fuel in it. Let's hook the fuel line back up and see if it starts now. It's almost half a tank now. So I've got a Noid light on number 1 injector. We're going to see if it's got injector pulse. Definitely got injector pulse. In fact, it's trying to start. So that sensor down there that I got unplugged, that 4-wire connector, is the manifold absolute pressure / temperature sensor. And I thought I'd unplug it to see what would happen. In scan data here, it goes to manifold absolute pressure goes to 0 volts and 2.9 inches of mercury, and intake air temperature at minus 48. So that's definitely the temp sensor. Let's see if it starts. Well, here's where we're at. As far as I can tell, we got fuel pressure, although I never checked the fuel pressure right actually at the rail, because that would require an adapter in there. We got injector pulse. I can't tell if we got injector fuel delivery, because I'd have to tee a pressure gauge in and see if the pressure drops if I disable the fuel pump. Got spark. It sounds like it's cranking normal. It doesn't have a total loss of compression, but the timing chain may have jumped and it may be out of time, although it hasn't set any codes. It just had that map sensor code, and that's cleared now. The map sensor reading is not skewed. It did not fire with the map sensor unplugged. So I got to figure out a way to qualify if the timing chain has jumped on this thing. So there's the 4 plugs out of it. They're pretty wet, yet I couldn't smell fuel when I was cranking it, so I assumed it wasn't getting any, but they're pretty wet. So I'm going to clean the plugs and put them back in there and see if it'll fire up. Maybe put a little oil in the cylinders to lubricate the cylinders in case they're washed. So there's the compression in number 1. It's not great. I suspect there's fuel in the cylinder and wash the rings down. I'm going to check the other 3 cylinders, see if they're all about the same. Put some oil in the cylinders. Okay, let's check cylinder number 2. $125. Okay, so this is cylinder 3. Bypassing the starter relay. $125. And this is cylinder 4. $125. So this thing should run. I'm going to put a little oil in the cylinder and clean these spark plugs and see if it'll fire. Either that or the fuel is shitty. I didn't take a fuel sample when I had the fuel line off. Guess I should have. So I put a few drops of automatic transmission oil in the spark plug holes. I've sandblasted the spark plugs. Could use a new set, but I don't want to put any money in this thing if the engine is toast. Although it's got decent compression, in my opinion. So we're going to put these spark plugs back in and see what happens. Well, let's see what happens when we try and start this thing now. Wonder if it could be fuel quality. Let's see if there's any fault codes set after that cranking event. So let's see if there's any codes. Generator F terminal low. Well, that's not going to cause a problem. I don't know why that's set. Functional tests, engine running, engine off tests. Let's see what we have to choose from. I tried running it on propane and it won't fire, so it's acting like a mechanical issue. I wonder if there's an easy way to control or verify the cam timing is right. Wonder if we could compare cylinder compression rise to spark event. So this is a bidirectional test of coil number 2. You can see that the computer can fire the coil. Got good spark. Well, there's the crankshaft sensor signal at the bottom. Number 1 ignition coil, channel 4, the red trace. The blue trace is the exhaust cam, and the green trace is the intake cam. But I don't know if it's timed or not. I looked on the waveform library for a known good waveform and I couldn't find one. But I'm going to have to try. So I've searched all over the internet and the Technicians Network for known good waveforms, and I can't find one for this 2.4. So I'm going to try again tomorrow, looking on some other resources, and if I can't find one, I'm going to pull the timing cover off, or not timing cover, the valve cover off, and manually see if the timing marks line up. But that's the only thing I can think of. The fuel seems good. It's got fuel. It's got spark, got compression, it's supposed to run, but obviously doesn't. So I'm thinking that exhaust cam is out of time or intake cam is out of time, and I don't know what these waveforms are supposed to look like because I can't find a known good pattern. So we'll pick up when we get some more information. So we decided to do exploratory. It's not that bad to pull this valve cover off. Remove the 4 coils, disconnect the fresh air PCV line and the PCV hose from the valve cover, and pull the valve cover off. This is not good. So I haven't lined it up yet. I'm going to put a screwdriver in the cylinder because we should be able to see piston coming up to TDC. There is a mark on the crank, so I'm going to compare that as well. So I can turn the crankshaft pulley with a wrench through the wheel opening, and I've got a screwdriver in number 1 spark plug hole so I can watch the piston coming up. So I'm going to turn the engine in the direction of rotation. You see the piston coming up, and I'm just going to go until it stops moving. Right there. There's where it stopped moving, and there's the timing mark. So that one seems to be lined up. Let me see if I can get in here. So there's the timing mark on the intake camshaft, and it lines up with this surface, but there's no timing mark anywhere to be seen for the exhaust. I think it's way back here. So the exhaust camshaft's out of time, which would make sense if the intake cam is corrected. Should still have fairly good compression, but it won't breathe correctly if the exhaust cam is, especially if it's retarded. You can't even see a mark on here. Let's see if I can find it. Well, I was playing with it here, wiggling this, and it just jumped time again. The intake cam is timed, but the exhaust cam is out of time. So my concern now, you can see the slack in the chain here, is that it might have bent a valve. I don't think so, but really need to, maybe I'll look in the cylinders with a borescope, see if there's any signs of piston contact. But it had 125 pounds compression across the board, so hopefully it hasn't bent a valve.